Hi, I'm David Purpura. It's my pleasure to introduce the symposium, The Road to Scale Up from Idea to Intervention Fidelity. We'll have three presentations. I will start the first one, then Megan McClellan will do a second one, and then Tricia Zucker will finish up with the third one. And then after these three, Andy Mashburn will be the discussant, and we'll have some time for questions for everybody as well. I'm going to talk about my presentation using picture books to support mathematical language learning in preschool from idea to intervention. This is a project that has been developed across a series of different studies that right now is in the middle of a IES development grant where we're developing a classroom-based intervention built off of the work that we've done over the last 7 or 8 years. There are a large number of collaborators on this project that I'm very grateful for, who have put in countless hours of work. You can see their names on the screen. They're from collaborators to graduate students and postdocs and staff, as well as our preschool teachers and director who have been actively involved in the development of this curriculum supplement. So I want to start off with talking about the rationale for studying mathematical language. We know that early math skills don't develop in isolation from other schools. There's a really tight connection between math and other domains, particularly language skills in early development. The pathways model for mathematical development developed by Lefebvre and colleagues suggests that language is one of the strongest and most stable of the pathways in early math development. And this finding has been replicated numerous times across many different labs in many countries. And there's been a growing body of work that suggests that it's not just a link between general language skills and mathematics, but rather it's a link between specific mathematical language and mathematics skills. So what is mathematical language? I want to first start out clarifying the distinction between a couple different terms that are commonly used in the literature, specifically mathematical language versus mathematical vocabulary. There are some distinctions in between these terms, but maybe not really formal distinctions. I typically use mathematical language or math language when talking about this construct at the preschool age, because they're not terms that have really clear, consistent definitions all of the time. They're not static. They're changing their relative terms. Whereas when we get into older grades, the mathematical vocabulary that's used in those grades is much more static, has a clear meaning to a specific term. I also want to distinguish between mathematical language and number talk or numeracy. Math language, those are those words and concepts that are important for early math development, like more, few, before, after, whereas number talk or numeracy skills, number talk is parents' use of number words, words like 1, 2, 3, or other counting words, whereas numeracy is children's ability to use exact number skills such as counting, relations, and operations. These are actually distinct constructs from math language. And so really here we're primarily focusing on mathematical language. And there are actually several different aspects of math language that we could focus on. First is quantitative language. This also overlaps with constructs such as quantifiers and relational language, and involves terms such as more, combine, a lot, same, similar, different, take away, less, and few. And we've tried to work a few different classifications of categories within quantitative language. One way to classify this is using terms like greater terms like words like more, most, a lot, or equivalent terms like same, similar, different, or a category of lesser terms like few, less, least. Another way of looking at it are terms related to static amounts. A lot, few, that they may be or they may not be exact amounts, but they're static, versus comparing amounts where you're contrasting multiple quantities or in some ways changing amounts, like combining or taking away. These different categories get at different terms that we've used in this broader quantitative language section. And there's been a large amount of work focused on how these skills, these mathematical language skills, specifically quantitative language, impact or are related to children's early math development. A recent meta-analysis has demonstrated a very strong relation between math language and math skills with a correlation of about 0.4 to 0.5. Math language has also been shown to be the strongest predictor of growth in math performance during preschool, elementary school, and even into middle school. It's more proximal to math performance than is general language, and it explains the relation between parent-child math engagement and children's numeracy development. And then in the first intervention study that we did in this area, we found that improving children's math language also resulted in improved numeracy skills. With this intervention, what we did was we used children's picture books that had quantitative and spatial language embedded in the books, and we made sure not to use any numeracy instruction or numeracy words while we were doing the intervention. And we found that not only did the intervention improve children's mathematical language skills compared to an active control group, but it also improved their numeracy skills. Overall, we've done a series of 4 intervention studies on math language. That first study that I was just telling you about was published in JRE several years ago. It was a small sample. It was an initial pilot study that we did. There were only 47 children, all in Head Start, and we found those positive effects on both math language and numeracy. Then the next step in this was scaling this up to a parent level intervention, because trying to impact children's math skills through the home is a really challenging task. And what we wanted to do was use picture books, which are things that parents typically do in the home to improve children's math skills. So we developed a series of 3 picture books. We recruited 84 preschool-age children. The intervention was implemented by their parents. This was a broad community sample. Parents read those 3 books over the course of 4 weeks. Each time, they read each book 4 times for a total of 12 total sessions. We found positive and sustained effects on both math language and numeracy skills. And those sustained effects were found even 8 weeks after the end of the intervention. And we also have a registered report using math language using a math language intervention, using these similar books, where we created 3 different versions of the books. One that was just the math language version, one where we took out all the math language terms and replaced them with exact numeracy terms, and then a third condition where we combine both quantitative language and exact numeracy skills into the books to test out the mechanisms of how quantitative language and numeracy either uniquely or jointly improve children's math or numeracy performance. We did find in this one, in contrast to the other effects that we found, or the other studies, we did find more limited effects of the individual conditions, so the quantitative language only versus or the numeracy only. But we did find positive effects on the combined condition. I will note that this intervention, which was accepted as a stage 1 registered report and is currently under review for our stage 2 in principle, or stage 2 registered report, was done during the height of the Omicron wave of COVID, and there were a lot of challenges that went into conducting an intervention on this topic during that period. But this has also led to our current intervention study, where we're developing this intervention for classroom use. Rather than just use of the books, we're actually connecting the books and guided play activities to build a more robust classroom level intervention. And that we're currently in the 2nd year of that project, doing some feasibility testing on that. And I'll talk about the development of this intervention and where we're going from here. So I want to first step back and talk about constructing these math language books. You'll see on here, we have some pictures of some of the covers of the books. We actually have, across a few different grants, we've developed 9 of these little elephants books. 6 of them that are being used in this intervention are focused on quantitative language. And there are 3 that we had developed for another project that are focused on spatial language. But to develop these books, we really took a four-part approach in our development. First, we wanted the books to be empirically grounded in effective book design processes. So we worked with a professional illustrator and a professional author because we're not experts in picture book design, and we wanted to make sure that we did draw on the expertise of individuals who had done this work before. We also drew on some of the empirical literature surrounding the use of children's books to improve children's vocabulary and language development. And we utilized things like dialogic reading prompts that we built into the books in a scaffolded way to make it easier for parents or teachers to ask those high quality dialogic reading type questions while they're reading the books to their children. We also focused on making sure that the books were laid out in a way that supported language learning. Specifically, we have text on one side of the page and the illustration on the other, so that children aren't being distracted by multiple pictures on either side of the page that don't align with the text that's being read. We also wanted to make sure that we developed these books in both English and Spanish, in particular because we didn't want to just have a post hoc translation of the books into Spanish, because we wanted to make sure that the words that were included in the books were more dialect neutral, were ones that were easily understood by children regardless of their dialect. And we also had to address some of the intricacies of quantitative language across both English and Spanish up front rather than waiting till later. For example, some words like the word most don't exist in Spanish. You would say la más or la mayoría, but neither one has directly the same meaning. So we want to make sure to address those right up front. And then also, we wanted to build math language integrated into the pictures and into the text. And so we worked with the author and the illustrator to make sure that the text and the pictures were really rich in opportunities to engage in this math language discussion. Why math language picture books? Why not develop another type of intervention? The reason that we selected the developing picture books is because they can be a very structured opportunity to share math language instruction with children in a way that's already happening in classrooms and the home. In classrooms, teachers are reading picture books. At home, parents are reading picture books. And so engaging in these types of developing materials that allow teachers and parents to engage in math while doing something that they normally do in that environment, we felt like was one of the strongest ways to support the uptake of this type of intervention. Here on this page, you'll see a couple pictures of us during the development process. One of the things that we were really attentive to during this process was making sure that the text and the dialogic reading prompts really aligned well with the illustrations, and that the questions were designed in a way where they became more complex across the reading as well as across the different readings. We had 3 prompts on each page, one for the first reading, one for the second reading, one for the third, and we color coded them, and we made sure that they got more complex as they went through the different readings. But we also wanted to make sure to expand beyond just books. In the home, we felt like using books was just about the right amount because of the demands in the home and the challenges with training parents beyond things that they know how to do and that fit into their existing schedules. In particular, classrooms and homes offer different opportunities. Classrooms have centers that can be used to align with the books, and so we wanted to make sure that we align that align the classroom opportunities in centers with the readings on the books to capitalize on the content that was happening in the books, in particular because there's been a lot of recent evidence that suggests that linking picture books with guided play activities can actually enhance language learning. And picture book reading and guided play center activities are really central activities that happen in preschool classrooms, mostly across the board. So this led to the development of the Reading and Playing with Math intervention funded by IES. This intervention, you can see it's a 15-week curriculum supplement where teachers engage in book reading and guided play activities twice a week. We have session guides for each of the for each session each week that provide information such as definitions of key terms, which dialogic reading questions to read, which book to read, as well as instructions for center activities, including materials that need to be set up, examples of guiding questions that can be used, and just more general information on that session. We've also structured it where we identify materials that can typically be set up in a classroom. In the examples you see in the pictures, we have two different examples of tents. One, if the classroom has access to real play tents, some classrooms do, they can just use a regular tent. Or if they don't have those materials, they can develop a tent using chairs and a blanket, just like kids do at home in building forts. And so we've tried to set it up so that teachers won't need to purchase materials to set up the guided play centers. They can really use materials that can be found in homes and in schools. But we also have examples of higher quality materials that could be used if those are available. We also have 6 picture books and a total of 30 guided sessions. So each book is read 5 times across the 15 weeks. But we also recognize that there have been some challenges in the scale-up process. First, we need to understand the needs of different groups, parents, teachers, and children, to really get them to engage in these materials across the different settings and across the different materials, and make sure that these are activities and storybooks that parents and teachers really want to engage in, as well as children really want to engage in multiple times. One of the challenges is figuring out how much time is enough. With the parent-led intervention, we used 4 weeks, reading the books 3 times a week, so a total of 12 sessions. Whereas in the classroom, we've initially set it up as 15 weeks, 30 total sessions. Right now, we're trying to work and figure out, is that enough time? Is that too much? How much is just the right amount of time to get the impact that we want on children's math language skills and numeracy? And does that vary across the different settings? We also need to figure out are working to figure out how to design activities that are feasible, effective, and cost-effective as well. Teachers don't have a lot of time to do new things. They don't have time to add more into the classroom. They don't have the funding to purchase new materials. And so our goal is to develop this intervention in as cost-effective of a way as possible, and try to use materials that can easily be found around classrooms or in homes. Additionally, we want to be attentive to the precision of language and translations. We want to make sure that these books and sessions are accessible to a broad range of children across language backgrounds. And then the other challenge that we have is the balance between disseminating findings, developing an intervention that can easily be scaled up into typical classrooms, but also ensuring that the intervention is robust enough to have the desired effects even at that scaled up level. And so there's a lot of challenges that we're working through to figure out what is the right amount for this intervention. So that's my presentation. If you have any questions, you can reach me at my email or through Twitter, as well as during the question and answer time at the end. Thank you.
My name is Megan McClellan from Oregon State University, and I'm here to talk about the development and scaling of an intervention called Red Light, Purple Light Self-Regulation intervention. I'm very grateful to my fantastic collaborators and colleagues that have worked on this intervention over the last number of years through a series of grants that we have gotten from IES and other sources. So let me first start by orienting us around how we are defining the construct of self-regulation. We are really talking about executive function being based in executive function processes of attentional or cognitive flexibility, focusing, paying attention, working memory, remembering instructions, and inhibitory control, which means being able to demonstrate self-control. We see self-regulation as an umbrella construct that includes the integration of executive function skills into behavior, which is particularly important for young children as they navigate increasingly academic classrooms. We also consider self-regulation to be the conscious control of thoughts, emotions, and actions, and also, in a nutshell, to think about the ability to stop and think first before you act or do something. So we have a lot of evidence to support that self-regulation, referring to these executive function, including these executive function processes, predicts short and long-term social success and life outcomes, as well as academic success. So there's lots of evidence, not just our work, but many others showing this over time. And there's been a number of early childhood interventions because of maybe the importance or the potential for malleability in these skills. There's been a number of early childhood intervention programs that have focused on promoting these skills in young children with varying levels of success. So this gets me to the focus of the work that we've been doing in collaboration with colleagues over the last, I would say, dozen years, perhaps 10 to 12 years to think about. It's called Red Light, Purple Light, or RLPL. And it's an intervention that focuses on trying to improve children's self-regulation using a series of games that are played often. We're playing it in the preschool classroom. This series of games helps children practice through music and movement games how to stop and think first and then act using these kinds of activities. Kids really enjoy playing these games. They're often done during circle time. I think there are some key components in the games that are important to note. They systematically increase in cognitive complexity over time. So they're often done twice a week during circle time, and they take the place of circle time the teacher brings all the children together, and they have a hello song, and then they do one or two games that get harder over time, and then they have a goodbye song. And so I think the important thing is to help kids continue to practice these self-regulation skills in fun ways that increase in complexity over time. In the work that we've done, this has been a teacher-led intervention over 8 weeks. It has been tested in a couple of different delivery modes, but in general, it's done over 8 weeks and twice per week, usually during circle time. I think this is an important piece that this is not a comprehensive intervention or program or curriculum. The games can be integrated into early learning settings. We have really found it to be important to require minimal materials or trainings that teachers or educators can be trained quickly. It's rather, there's some flexibility as long as they follow sort of the complexity and the sequence of the games. And I think we have really had an eye towards making the intervention, which is fairly focused, but easy to scale, practical and feasible for teachers to integrate into their everyday classroom setting. Because as David was already talking about, it's very challenging to get teachers to buy into a big intervention or a whole new program, especially given the current context that we are all living in. So we have really focused on the practical aspects of helping teachers and having the games be feasible and practical. To date, we have done a number of studies that have evaluated the promise of Red Light, Purple Light, and there was a recent What Works Clearinghouse intervention report that found moderate evidence for children's improved self-regulation using a few of the studies. So to date, I'll just quickly say that there has been 4 studies on red light, purple light that have built on each other and led us to continue to replicate and test and refine this intervention. It started with Shauna Tomini's work and with a very initial pilot study of 65 children, and we have found evidence for increased self-regulation and literacy for children, especially those starting the year or with lower levels of skills initially. We replicated, we found there could be something here, so we need to replicate this. So Sarah Schmidt led that paper looking at children who were all from Head Starts, preschools, and we found evidence there for overall increased self-regulation from fall to spring of the school year on a direct assessment, 2 direct assessments of self-regulation, with some evidence for increased math with a large effect size for children who are dual language learners. Then we had another study where we tested it within a school district, and that was more of a diverse sample. And we found some evidence for increased self-regulation, especially after this was a summer program, so it was a different delivery mode. And then we found some evidence for increased growth in literacy and math as the children transitioned into kindergarten. And then finally, this is our goal 2, development grant that we have found that we published a few years ago that was an exclusive Head Start sample, and we found an overall increase in self-regulation and math. And that has led us, so we've had a development grant from IES, and that has led us to our current initial efficacy trial that I'll be talking about. Let me just quickly walk through an example of one of our more complex games. I'll show a very short video clip. This kind of a drum beats game is done actually at the end of our intervention, and it requires children to actually listen and keep in mind 3 different pairings of rules with what she's doing. So they have to do different things for each of the actions she's doing. So the kids have to really focus and pay attention. This is pretty tough for 4 or 5-year-olds to do. So it comes later in our intervention, but I'll just give you one quick example. Then the teacher puts them all together.
Can manage to do this at the same time, everybody. Look at this. All 3 of us.
So that's one example.
What do you do?
And then they go back to their mats. So that's one example of one of our more complex games where they have to really remember and pair, when she does one thing, they have to shake their head, or when they do and she does another thing, they jump, and then remember all the different rules. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the iterative developmental process that we did as part of our previous IES development grant, where we refined the initial intervention that we had been developing because we wanted to add an SR, what we call plus condition. We had some, evidence that these games were important and they were improving children's math skills. And we had no specific math content in the games. But as you might know, there's a lot of bidirectionality and co-development of executive function or self-regulation skills with early math development in children. So we thought, well, we might have a stronger effect if we added a condition that included literacy and math as part of the games. explicit focus on some literacy and math concepts as part of the games, in addition to what we call our SR, or basically just the self-regulation games that we had been developing. We worked with master teachers as part of this intervention development process, and then we tested the promise of the intervention in 13 Head Start classrooms. We had random assignment at the classroom level, and you can see we had what we would say an underpowered RCT. We also provided structured, individualized, relationship-based support for teacher implementation. We had a total of 188 children. We had 157 children with fall and spring data, with some attrition, 17%. And then we did a fall, spring, pre and post test data collection with a fairly diverse sample. These were all children in Head Start. And I'll just highlight, this is a big graph, but I'll just highlight the highlighted effect sizes. Overall, what we found was children who got any version of the intervention. We had two different conditions. Remember, the self-regulation condition and the SR plus that included the math and literacy components of the games. Anyone that, if you got any version of that compared to a business as usual control, we found an effect especially strong on children's math. There was a trend for the effect on improved self-regulation. And then when we compared the different conditions, we found some evidence, we found significant effects of improved math outcomes in the spring of the preschool year, with some evidence that the SR plus might be a little bit of a stronger effect, although it was, not statistically significantly different from that. And then we did not find, we found a trend for also similar effect on slightly weaker on children's self-regulation, with very little effects on literacy improvement. I'll just quickly show this graphically. You can see these are the spring self-regulation scores. This is self-regulation, math, and literacy. And you can see that compared to the business as usual, the two conditions showed some improvement. Nothing really happening for literacy that we could detect. And then there's also some indication, but overlap in the confidence intervals for self-regulation outcomes. Okay, so we've also tried to start testing some other research on this intervention. We did an initial cost effectiveness study on red light, purple light models of delivery. We found that a cost of $23 per child was associated with a 1 unit increase of effect size on children's self-regulation scores, telling us that there could be some indication this was cost effective, but we needed to test it better. Let me move to our initial efficacy trial that we currently have through IES to test the effectiveness, to scale and test the efficacy of the red light, purple light intervention. Our design was to test it with 880 children in 110 classrooms. We're currently just in the second year of the study. And then we experienced COVID. We have all experienced the COVID challenges and strategies, like many of my colleagues and researchers doing similar kinds of studies. And there's just a whole slew of challenges related to the childcare crisis nationally and where we are in Oregon. Significant delays in background checks for teachers, educators, and our research staff. High rates of illness for children and staff. Incredible burnout, lack of staff, incredible just delays and closures, even just delays in opening a classroom. That really has impacted we're in our very first year. So it is not as bad as I think it could have been a few years ago, but it still has impacted our data collection and implementation. And then you can just see some challenges that children have, leading to some child care centers feeling overextended and unable to participate, but also having some of our other centers feeling a greater buy-in because the intervention has been found to improve children's behavior. So their self-regulation anyway. So What we've done to try to strategize is we changed our design to randomize at the classroom level rather than center level. This did not actually affect our power, which I'm happy to talk about later. We are currently working with 30 classrooms and 212 children, our very first cohort. We have, I think, something that has helped us a lot is we've had these long-term strong relationships with the school districts and childcare organization and centers. And teachers are interested and excited about this program because the children absolutely love these games. They're fun, they're music and movement based. And so the initial feedback from children and educators across the board has been very positive so far. And this, matches our previous studies that we've done in the past. So to conclude, through an iterative process, the red light, purple light intervention has demonstrated some evidence of improved effects on children's self-regulation and early math. The teachers have found that the games are easy to implement in their everyday classrooms settings and that children really enjoy the games. We have had a number of COVID-19 related challenges, have tried to be nimble and adapt. We've made some changes to our current efficacy trial and have had also challenges in recruitment. But I would say that the popularity of our intervention has helped. Perhaps the targeted focus of the intervention has been helpful. And teachers have seen red light, purple light as also a way to meet the challenges that they're experiencing and their children are experiencing that they're working with and help support children. So I'm happy to answer questions. You can email me at megan.mcclellan@oregonstate.edu. And I just want to acknowledge and be very grateful for the funding that we've received to do this work so far. Thank you.
I'm going to be talking to you today about a program called Developing Talkers and how we scaled this up. It's a language intervention developed at the Children's Learning Institute at UT Health in Houston. My name is Tricia Zucker, and before I begin, I do want to first mention that I have a conflict of interest to declare, and yet that's exactly what we're talking about, is that we have licensed this Developing Talkers program to Scholastic Inc. So that is a conflict, but nonetheless, I will be presenting our research, and I want to also explain just how grateful I am to our funding agencies and our collaborators. There have been so many people who have been part of this work, and I'm especially grateful to Susan Landry and Maria Carlo, who really helped with a lot of the development stories you'll hear today. So in thinking about the journey from how we began by piloting this supplemental curriculum to actually commercializing the curriculum that you see here on the left called Pre-K on My Way, the language module. You'll hear about 10 to 12 years of work that is summarized today. And these are supplemental curricula called Developing Talkers in English and Hablemos Juntos in Spanish, focused on increasing children's language outcomes and an emphasis on vocabulary. This journey began with a team of researchers and educators who really wanted to make a playful and fun approach for increasing kids' language skills in the early grades, with most of our work happening in preschool and kindergarten. One of the fun aspects of this program are the mascots who you see here. For example, Scout the Squirrel is a silly little stick puppet who is nuts for words and helps the kids be just as crazy about words as he is. Lose the Ladybug also teaches students spot-on strategies for success in school. And so you can see that Scout the Squirrel is still a key part of the Scholastic version of the program, but he got a little bit of a makeover. He's now a blue squirrel. And we were thrilled as curriculum developers that the three core components of these curricula stayed the same in the new Scholastic version. First is explicit vocabulary instruction, using picture cards and repeated opportunities for students to hear and use focal words. Second is teacher use of open-ended questions that are both concrete and abstract. And third is a scaffolding approach to conversations that we call Strive for 5. And these core components were carried through into the commercial version. Our research also focused on developing talkers as part of a multi-tiered system of support, meaning that we had tier 1 or whole group read alouds and tier 2 activities for students who began that school year with weak initial vocabulary skills. And these program components are, again, still continued in the new commercial version of the product, but are now called read alouds and small group activities rather than the tier 1 and tier 2 terms that we had used in our research. So how did we move from this initial development to a national product? Well, we followed the steps that you see here that look a lot like the typical IES grant structure that would begin with development, move into pilot studies before efficacy studies. A few things that were important to note as we moved through these steps was that we iteratively developed with feedback from many, many early childhood teachers, as well as their coaches, because coaches often gave us more honest feedback than teachers. Meaning that teachers would just tell us they liked everything, but coaches were very critical of really everything we put in front of them. And another thing I want to highlight is that we used implementation science approaches and frameworks to help us identify why teachers may have faced barriers to implementing the program as designed. And all of this led us to revise and revise and revise the program over and over, using a continuous improvement mindset and across several versions. You've probably heard that everything is bigger in Texas, and indeed it is. Most of our initial development and testing of this curriculum supplement took place as part of our statewide professional development program that's called Texas School Ready. Texas School Ready is already scaled up at the time that we started to test out developing talkers and was at the sites you see on the map here. On the right, you see our current impact of the Texas School Ready program. And again, you can see that this is a comprehensive early childhood professional development program that includes coaching, progress monitoring tools, and state adopted curriculum. So I'm telling you this so that you'll understand that all the initial piloting really began in what I think was a really ideal context for seeking a lot of user input from diverse perspectives, and as well as in bilingual settings. One other thing I want to mention about our development context that I thought made it really a fruitful place to do this type of work is just the core values of the Children's Learning Institute that you see here. This is a place where people always are really taking a very pioneering approach to things and aren't afraid to operate in complex settings, which is good because I began this as a postdoc and had no idea that what I was being asked to do to, drop a curriculum supplement into thousands of classrooms across the state. I had no idea really how complex it was, and that's probably for the best, because I might have been worried. But nonetheless, we got started with our research right away in our first study that was very brief, 4 weeks. And in that study, we saw some evidence of promise. We had moved the needle a slight bit on just some proximal outcomes. So we decided to continue on into study 2. This is where we really learned about our first set of challenges. And that was truly the packaging. Teachers hated a binder that we had used to put all of our vocabulary cards, book reading materials, and so forth into. So that was one of the things that we revised. By study 3, we were moving into the next version of the program and really starting to focus on our partnerships. And at that point, we actually started hiring educators to work part-time with the research team to help us add in some of those fun and creative parts like the mascots that you met earlier. In study 4 is when, as researchers and program developers, it was hands off. We really moved the program out into the Texas School Ready statewide program. And at that point, coaches became the trainers, not the developers. Again, this was a really critical step that was important to streamlining and revising the program. Study 5, we further identified some additional barriers to fidelity, but we started to see improvements in fidelity as well as larger effect sizes. And it wasn't until study 6 that we almost got a significant effect on a distal vocabulary measure, the PPVT. So all of these study references I'll share with you on the last slide, but they're published in peer-reviewed journals such as JREE. Remember, everything is not only bigger in Texas, but it's also bilingual in Texas. So from very early on, we have been studying a Spanish version of the program that development was led by Maria Carlo. And this was wonderful because it was not just a translation of the English program, but it was its own set of text. Some books were the same and available bilingually across English and Spanish, but others were unique. This led us to really, really wonderful partnerships as well, where we were able to work in classrooms near the Rio Grande Valley area, the Texas-Mexico border, and get a lot of input from heritage Spanish speakers on how to best identify Spanish English cognates, or how to consider multiple meaning words, and how to best make those multiple meanings clear to English learners. Although I don't have time to say too much about these findings, but I think it's so important, again, to note that implementation science frameworks have been essential for us understanding why teachers are acting rationally and not always implementing all the things that researchers put in front of them. You can see we studied adherence, dosage, and teacher satisfaction as the aspects of fidelity. And for the most part, teachers were implementing with pretty good adherence. And yet it was implementation science lenses, like you see here with the theoretical domains framework that we used, that help us to understand what are the barriers to teachers implementing the programs as designed. And much like the other presenters have talked about today, limited instructional time is the biggest barrier all teachers face, as well as competing priorities across the multiple curricula that they were required by their district to use. And in addition, we learned that teachers needed more knowledge and skills to really feel ready to advance children's academic language in the ways that we were asking for. So this led us to additional supports that we were able to plug into the program so that teachers felt not only that they could do this with a short block of time, it all took 20 minutes or less, and also that they had the skills to be able to implement well. So again, we continued implementing enhanced versions of the program in over 500 classrooms each year through that Texas School Ready statewide model. We also have a part of our Children's Learning Institute that is called Solutions Group that allowed us to provide the program at cost to districts that did not qualify for Texas School Ready. So by the time we had finished all of the research that I mentioned before, we had accumulated more than 4,000 users of the program who were always giving us lots of input. We also combined 3 philanthropic gifts as well as 1 IES development and innovation grant. So that led to a lot of development and innovation funds that really allowed us to have 3 different versions that we iterated on before we reached the commercialization point and the national launch. And it's at that point of being ready for commercialization that we felt that we really needed to be able to answer the questions you see here. Not only does this work and for whom does it work, but under what conditions? And at that point, we had evidence from past empirical studies, like you see on the left, to demonstrate that this program did work for increasing children's proximal vocabulary outcomes. But there were some other things that as researchers and program developers, we had to learn to accept. And these are just a few things that I wanted to note here, because some of these things felt challenging at the moment. Through the commercialization process, you feel some loss of control. Off goes your baby. And yet it allows you to gain innovation and scale and really get evidence-based practices out into classrooms. So it's both scary and exciting all at the same time. As a researcher, you have to work through your own plans of how you and your university will manage your conflicts of interest, because you'll see we want to keep studying the program. And finally, at the commercialization stage, thinking about cost and resource considerations might lead you to some important compromises. For example, there's one acceptable change that I want to describe here in the commercial version. So on the left, you see the research version where we had initially placed stickers or printed the guiding questions or the in-text questions right at the point of use. So you can see it highlighted now. The commercial version of the product instead has the questions summarized on a card that the teacher simply clips onto the back of the book. And it turns out not only is this an acceptable compromise to reduce cost of the program, but we have found that as we continue to watch teachers implementing the new Pre-K on My Way version, that it's a very acceptable change and that teachers are still implementing with good adherence. So what are we currently working on with these programs? Well, this slide shows you a little bit about one of our current efficacy studies that's in its second cohort. It's led by me and Jessica Logan. And what we're looking at here is how teachers respond as learners as they implement two distinct versions of the Developing Talkers curriculum, and they receive different professional development approaches that are randomly assigned based on their response using a sequential multiple assignment randomized trial, or a SMART design. In a second efficacy study that is also currently underway and led by me and Maria Carlo, we are looking at the efficacy of the bilingual version of the commercial program this time. So that's the Pre-K on My Way Scholastic version. And in this design that you see illustrated here, it's a factorial design where we're replicating some of Susan Landry's past research that combines school and home interventions, but this time with a more narrow focus on language outcomes for bilingual learners who are also experiencing risk because they are scoring below initial benchmarks at the beginning of the school year. So part of what we want to look at here is how we can replicate that Texas School Ready model that was very comprehensive, replicate that design, but in bilingual context and with a more narrow focus, specifically on maintaining Spanish at home rather than dropping your Spanish as you start school, while also facilitating cross-linguistic transfer at the school day. So thank you for your attention. These are the peer-reviewed studies I mentioned earlier in the talk. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any of these methods that you see here. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining. I hope you had a good time during the video portion of the session. This is the discussion and Q&A portion of our session for the symposium titled The Road to Scale Up from Idea to Intervention Fidelity. And my name is Andy Mashburn and I'll be the discussant. We don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm going to move really quickly to be able to leave some time for Q&A. And if anybody has any questions at the moment, feel free to add them into the chat. And while I'm doing my my discussion piece, people can, some of the presenters can maybe respond to some of these chats. I hope to leave about 5 minutes at the end so that we can at least have a chance for some Q&A here. So first of all, hang on, there we go. A big thank you, a big shout out for the presenters. What a wonderful presentation by David, by Megan, by Trisha. Just really outstanding work. I also want to note that Sarah Schmidt is going to be here representing the Reading and Play with Math project. So as questions or thoughts come up related to that, Sarah will be the one answering those questions. And so in the spirit of celebrating all this good work, if anybody wants to throw up an emoji or something that shows, you know, a heart or a thumb up or something like that to recognize all the good work of these researchers, please do. All right, last few minutes, I just want to share a few observations about Scale Up, and then we'll lead it to the Q&A for the presenters. And so my first observation related to all this good work, well, first of all, let me just say that what I'm doing is I'm going to define Scale Up as the scientific process that education researchers like you and I go through in our efforts to solve social problems, in our efforts to identify intervention strategies that can be useful, to develop those strategies, to test those strategies, and to implement those strategies at a wide scale. And so Scale Up, this is a long process. And I just want to note such interesting activities that these research teams have done in the spirit of scaling up. And some of this is, you know, theorizing, conceptualizing, secondary analysis to try to just be able to understand what are some of these malleable factors that could be the targets of our intervention. And then we move into our development activities where we might work with teachers to try to have them implement a small scale strategy or an activity in a class where we really understand it almost under a microscope. And then we might develop new communities of practice or professional learning communities or websites. We might write like Sarah and David did picture books. I guess you don't write a picture book, but you create a picture book as an intervention tool. Or you might be presented with little mascots like Scout and Luz and need to integrate them into the work like Trisha and her team are doing. And so also we go through these tests of these strategies. And so all kinds of interesting research activities along the way as we pilot, study utility and feasibility, promise, efficacy, cost, implementation, etc. So another observation I have is that in order to do this well, and I think all of our presenters will attest to this, it takes a team with a very diverse set of competencies. I mean, this involves understanding the creation of little micro level activities in a classroom, all the way down the road to understanding the power calculations for a multi-level design in order to test the efficacy. I want to just note scale up takes a long time. And you can see from these presentations, some of this work that our presenters were talking about goes back to 2005, 2008 with these early conceptualizations, 2010, 2012 with these initial tests of intervention strategies. And so you just have to recognize it's a long haul, it's a life's work in order to do scale up and to do scale up well. And I just want to note how noble of this work is. I mean, for all of us who are here to probably try to make the world a little better place, the idea of taking our light bulb ideas and turning them into concrete, actionable solutions that can have an impact on the well-being of young children. I just want to note each of these teams and all the teams that are out there doing any of this scale-up work. It's just noble work. You're making a difference in the lives of teachers and kids, and that means a lot. And lastly, and this is where I feel like some of the discussion could go, is these later phases of scale up, the testing, the efficacy, the follow-ups, the replication, they've never been more challenging. I have an efficacy trial right now going on in the field. Any of us who are doing field-based work, we recognize implementation is we're having challenges, disruptions, teachers leaving, teachers getting sick, kids getting sick. There's modifications that we've had introduced. We maybe can't all come together. That's not maybe what the teachers want. Thinking about how we move to a remote or virtual space. Adaptation, some of the key ingredients of our interventions may be creating stress and strain for teachers that don't have the time and energy to participate. And so we might need to take some of these things that were seen as key ingredients and adapt them, maybe to make them sort of as needed. Also, as you all know and know well and have heard, the research is hard now, recruiting samples, retaining samples. We've had to reduce our assessment batteries in order to make it less impactful for kids. And nowadays we don't have no treatment controls, thankfully, but the control groups these days are oftentimes implementing strategies, especially social emotional learning, regulatory strategies, just like almost like the intervention test group itself. And so all of a sudden, we don't really have a no treatment control. We have sort of an active control in our study designs. And so as I think about scale up and the future of scale up, I mean, the questions I have, which don't have good answers, but will the challenges we are experiencing in implementation and testing efficacy go away? Or is this part of the new reality of public systems of education? Will the efficacy trials that we're using right now and in the future, are we going to have What Works Clearinghouse certified studies of efficacy at the end of this, knowing that we've got attrition, knowing that we've got non-compliance, knowing we may have baseline and equivalence? These are things we'll see soon, whether or not we'll be able to learn efficacy, whether these programs work. And part of me is thinking, will we need to adopt other methods for testing efficacy? RCTs have been considered the gold standard, but I would say with all of these sort of extra challenges that we're experiencing in doing efficacy trials, at the end of this run of these current efficacy trials, we'll learn a lot as to whether or not they're actually the gold standard and whether we're learning enough about the impacts of these interventions or those confounds that are affecting our research designs. And so with that, what I would like to do is stop sharing, open this up for more discussion with our presenters. Thank you very much.
I think we can open it up for a Q&A. You could put it in the Q&A or in the chat, or just raise your hand. We just have a few minutes, but we're happy to take questions about other people's presentations. Just kidding.
I have a question. I liked how each of the presentations showcased how the work went from very small to scaled up. And so I would love to ask the presenters, if you were wanting to start developing an intervention, how would you recommend to start those early steps based on what you've already done and learned?
Well, Sonia, I don't mind going first. And Sonia is one of my collaborators in the Developing Talkers lines of research, and we have a current efficacy trial. So you already know that I think it's really important to understand what theoretically the core components are, the active ingredients, as well as what other more optional whistles and bells you're putting into your program, because that's going to be really important in how you train and ask teachers to implement, so that they understand if and when they have limited time to take part in delivering this intervention, what theoretically are the active ingredients. The essential or required components is often how we train on that versus the optional components. So that has been really key to keeping things slimmed down over the last few years of COVID disruptions. But I'd love to hear what others would say in response to this question.
I think, well, if you think about how this is your question about how we're managing this, I don't, right now, or just how you start this?
I think that how you start initially testing an
Yeah.
intervention without having funds to do so.
Oh, okay.
I see the smaller designs that are, and I
I
like
feel
what you just said about the core ingredients.
Yeah, that's super helpful what Tricia said. And then I feel like I was the queen of pilot grant funding. So and really good grad students, a former grad student, Sarah Schmidt, who was interested enough in doing part of it for a dissertation. And, I just cobbled together, Shauna Tomini did it for her. We just, back in the day, there wasn't funding. We didn't get our IES grant until we had already done a number of smaller studies. And we kept thinking, well, there's some promise here, but we better replicate. We don't know if this is really there. We need to test it out in different sample. So we just kind of built on it that way. I'm not sure, I'm sure other people have more successful ways, but I was able to cobble together funding from foundations and other sources.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think for our study and other intervention projects that we've done, engaging students, I think, is a really important part of it. But also, when I was at Purdue with David, we really engaged our lab school and other school partners and really, sort of co-develop some of this stuff with them. And they really helped us to pilot some of the activities even before we were in testing mode, right? So, kind of going into the lab school, seeing if kids were actually going to be engaged with some of the activities that we and teachers were developing. And so, I think that there's a phase even before the initial pilot testing of it that we have done that I think has helped us be successful in the sort of, iterative development work.
There's two questions, and I'm just looking at time. There's one around COI, and there's one to build on testing multiple arms of an intervention early. I think I would go with what Tricia said, which is like trying to keep it really clear about what it is you're what you're measuring and what you're testing, so that you have a clear idea of what's going on. We tried to keep it pretty focused and targeted, because if you test all these different things, it's just hard. It gets big quickly, and it's hard to know what's your active ingredients, perhaps sometimes, until you have enough, big enough of a study. But that's one option. I'm happy. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I agree. And if you're starting small, which many of us have had to do, then the ability to detect significant effects is going to be really limited the more conditions that you're adding. And so I think the first iteration for all of our projects has always been what Tricia has been saying, right? Like, what is the one key thing that we're really trying to test, and then sort of building out from there.
Yeah, I would say, hindsight is a superpower, but I am certainly the person who did not start simple. Sonia Cabell and I are often teased for being maximizers. So we had a IES-funded development grant in this line of work where we developed an app because we thought it would be just the most wonderful, seamless way to get folks to uptake our intervention. And it turned out that this app was dead even before the efficacy study was published, because it turns out that basically there's so many layers of app updates required. And once your study funding ends, I couldn't keep up with every time Apple updated its operating system. So
So I would agree with the advice of keep it slim, but I had to learn that the hard way. I always did too many things and wish I had kept it a little bit more tight at the beginning.
So quickly, Erin Higgins in the Q&A asked, how do you navigate the tension between needing to get solutions to the field quickly to be responsive to the challenges on the ground with the reality that scaling up takes a long time from initial insight to actual intervention? Oh my, we have really balanced this. I mean, we felt like, we have both things going. We have a statewide center. This feels in some ways quite disconnected, which is a challenge for me right now to the IES funded work, honestly. And there's huge needs in the field that we're seeing in the state of Oregon, and that's coming up over and over again. And so for this intervention anyway, that we did the red light, purple light, we tried to gather enough evidence and replicate enough that we felt that we could start. We do provide trainings to teachers and practitioners on the one that we feel like has the most evidence behind it. So we do a lot of trainings, and we wrote a book, a small little book for teachers to try and get the information out. And then at the same time, continuing to do this work and say, wow, we need to continue to be humble and see if this really plays out and not overstate, what we're finding, and that there's always room for improvement, which is what we're seeing.
So I think we're 5 minutes past time. I want to just invite anybody who has a question that wasn't answered and they want to follow up. I'm sure our presenters would welcome an email to each of them or any of them related to the questions that you all have. So thank you all for coming. I want to make one last plug to ask if you would rate this session. We were asked by our IES hosts to invite you all to rate this session as well. But thank you all so much for your participation, for your engagement, and I look forward to seeing you all in person sometime very, very soon.